Well, here we go again. And when Maddie and I talked about what we might do for the coming period of time, however long that is, we sort of centered in on we wanted something tied to the biblical witness, but relevant today. And so that's what we're focusing on, the biblical witness and how it intersects our lives today. Now, the reason for this is that, so many people who identify themselves as Christians have really just declared the irrelevance of the Bible. And it is seldom studied and just read occasionally by those who identify themselves as Christian. And so we're going to invest ourselves in some Bible study. And the strategy is going to be doing some tracing. Tracing is sort of a new word for a lot of us with the virus. But we're going to do some tracing, and it's going to look like this, is that we're going to look at the Hebrew preachers that are referred to as the Old Testament prophets, and we're going to look at their message. And then we're going to look at that in terms of what it means for today. And then the next Sunday, we're going to take Jesus' message out of the Gospels that is similar to the witness of that Hebrew prophet and deal with what Jesus said and how it relates to our lives today. And then the next week, we'll pick up another Hebrew preacher to do the same. So that'll sort of be the rhythm. That's going to be our journey. Now, in this 2-week rhythm that we're going to take, I'm going to sort of take the Hebrew preachers chronologically. And so we'll start with those who were in the 8th century BC and then end up with those who were more recent. But let's remember, all of these were in the sacred writings, which were available to Jesus. And upon these, Jesus depended significantly for his teachings. Now, to give you insight in how we're going to get started in the next 3 weeks, and to be sure it has to do with today, this first week we're going to deal with the phenomenon of the power grab. What does it mean to grab power? And is grabbing power compatible with faith? Then in a couple weeks, we're going to deal with the blame game. We're aware of the blame game in our lives and in the lives of others. And is the blame game compatible with faith? And then we're going to deal with the pride slide. And again, dealing with the issue, is pride compatible with the Christian faith? And so that's going to be our next next 3 sections, which will consume 6 weeks. So we start today with an understanding of the power grab. And we begin with the Old Testament prophet and preacher by the name of Hosea. And to understand Hosea and any of these early prophets, we must remember the situation that Hosea found himself in and that the Hebrew people were in. Remember, the Hebrew people were wanderers and nomads. In the first history we know of the people, they were here, they were there. They had synagogues from here and there, but finally they got what they believed was their promised land, and ended up in this very lucrative area that was called the Fertile Crescent that every nation wanted a piece of, and all of a sudden this was their place. So when they got a hold of their place, they had to decide how they were going to get along and how they were not going to get along. And the first way they sort of organized themselves was by tribes, which were pretty sizable extended families, if you will, different tribes. And the tribes had interrelationship among them and relationships within the tribe. So they needed leadership, and they turned to judges that they didn't have any governance. They were just rendered decisions as leaders of the people. But that didn't satisfy the Hebrew people, because they looked around and by cracky, other people had nations and they had kings and they had central places of focus for their culture. And so the Hebrew people decided they needed to become a nation. And then that nation was divided, and they had Israel and they had Judah. And that's sort of the 8th century. Also, instead of synagogues here and there, they decided they needed a temple. And so they built a temple. And that was more than a gathering place for people. It actually was the place where they experienced the presence of God in the Holy of Holies. So they had a nation, they had a temple, and they had realized that having judges wasn't enough because these other nations had kings, so they had kings. And so all of a sudden, the establishment in the Hebrew community was formed around 3 understandings. We're going to be a nation, we're going to have kings, and we've got a temple. And this was the Hebrew nation that Hosea is speaking to, and the Hebrew people. Now, what sparked Hosea's message was that there was a more powerful nation than Israel or Judah. And that nation was Assyria. And they were the power people of the Near Eastern world at that time. And Assyria was gaining strength and power. And so the king of Israel decided, I wonder if I can grab some of that power for the safety and security of Israel. I'm going to make a deal with Assyria. And he made an alliance with Assyria. And lo and behold, Hosea saw a problem with that. Because Assyria had no background in terms of the Hebrew understanding of God. Culturally, they were different. Hosea felt like making this alliance with this foreign power that had no similarities to who the Hebrew people essentially were was problematic. Because the Hebrew people were formed around the understanding of the second law, Deuteronomy 6:4, love God with your heart, soul, and strength. What does it look like, according to Hosea, for us to relate in an alliance with people that do not buy into our basic fabric as a people? And so Hosea cranked up his message, and it was a loaded one, because he said, Israel, you're a harlot. You're a prostitute. You're unfaithful to the covenant you have with God. We have become an unfaithful people. And to illustrate what he meant by that, he used his own story of his own marriage. Hosea was married to Gomer. Gomer was unfaithful. Gomer became a prostitute. And lo and behold, she went her way. But Hosea and an understanding of God's love, felt like God was calling Hosea himself to restore that relationship. And so he went on the marketplace of prostitutes and purchased Gomer back into his life. And he said, folks, you've been unfaithful, but God remains faithful and yearns for your return. And so using his own story, his message to the establishment of the Hebrew people, remember, kingship, nationhood, and they had a temple, but they had forgotten to love God with your heart, soul, and strength. And so Hosea preached to that establishment and said, by this alliance with this foreign country, you have led us into unfaithfulness. It's an incredible book, and be sure to get to the last chapter. It's only going to take you 30 minutes to read the book. But in the last chapter, chapter 14, is the final plea of Hosea for Israel to return to faithfulness. It's just a wonderful plea, if you will, by the preacher in the 8th century. Now, just as a prelude of things to come, he preached before the fall of Israel to this foreign power. So all he was getting at was the unfaithfulness of the nation Israel to the covenant they had with God. Jeroboam just wanted to identify with power. He was afraid of this foreign country. He wanted to grab a hold of that foreign country for the safety and security of Israel. And that seems innocent enough, except as Hosea said, if you forsake your values in terms of who you are for the sake of grabbing a piece of power, that is unfaithfulness. So that's the message of the prophet Hosea. We'll discuss this Sunday, and I've got 3 questions I'd like for you to think about as we anticipate talking about what it means to grab power, and to what extent grabbing power is a sign of unfaithfulness. So the first question is, in your knowledge of the history of the church, global, historically, or locally, what are illustrations that the grab for power, the power grab, has actually become a source of unfaithfulness for the people of God? So that has to do with the church. Secondly, personally, what are the stories of power grabbing on the part of individuals who grab power for the sake of their own safety and security, but in actuality are performing an act of unfaithfulness because they're forsaking the relationship with God? So first of all, with the church. Secondly, for individuals. But thirdly, the question is, who are the Hoseas in 2020 calling us back to the God of love? God's faithfulness has not changed. God still has messengers calling us back to faithfulness. And who are those preachers today? Not by ordination, but by message, calling us back to God's love. Looking forward to Sunday when we talk about power grabbing and is that compatible with faith?